Welcome to American Amnesia. I am your host, Cliff Garner, and I am back in Illinois. I had a wonderful stay with my brother in Santa Cruz and watched him work and really got to see a different part of the country. I don't recall ever really spending much time in that area, although I've been to San Fran a few times. Also been to Los Angeles a few times and San Diego a couple and down to TJ, Tijuana, a couple, but I saw some pretty cool stuff. Some stuff on the Donners. I might do a program on them yet. I find that interesting. And at any rate, I've been back for a few days now and kind of getting readjusted to life here in Illinois after a very exciting time away and doing some other things and seeing other places and just really breathing the air of a different part of the world, really. So it was really nice. I did enjoy it a lot. Well, I do have an announcement. We're up to over 2,000 views now. That's about, I don't know, about an average of 30 to 40 views per video. And I'd like to see that come up, but I'm not too worried about the size of my audience. I'm more worried about actually putting these things down to posterity and hopefully doing somebody some good by maybe opening their eyes to a few things. That's really my purpose, and I'll just plug on, whether I talk to 2 people or 1,000 or more. So there you go. Today I'd like to go into some stuff on the Obamacare. There's been a lot of nonsense really said about it. It is not working. So, now it is let the Democrats own it as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, it's crashing and burning. My own personal experience with it, I have not gone into complete detail on it, but I gave a pretty good general view on it in one of the earlier episodes. On here on American Amnesia. It does irk me. The hidden cost is hidden by the subsidy, and if they decide that you're not worthy of the subsidy, they want to get you for the full price, and they'll hold you accountable. They can. But I complained, and I put in a what do you call it? A formal protest of it, actually, and they never dealt with my case. I think that's how they get away with it, is that they just kind of shove you off to the side and then stiff you for the months that you don't pay. And I think that might be all it was all about anyway. It was just to gouge people, to give it to somebody else, to give it to people that couldn't pay. And I don't begrudge anybody on the subsidy, but I can't afford it myself. I come back to this economy here in the United States, and in my home state here in Illinois, it's really hard to make a living. In fact, I don't know that you'd want to call what I've been making a living wage. I've been making well under 12. I'm not even close to 20,000 a year, and they want to call, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to see the minimum wage go up, because it's really only going to dilute what I make. So I'm making more than most of the people making the minimum wage, but I'm not making what I should. I'm not even close. So, your so-called answers are really not answers. They're actually making things worse. Get your hands off of it, Dems. Come up with some new ideas. Every time you do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, it comes out the same. That is the definition of stupidity. You've proved yourself stupid. Let it go. Try something new. But anyway, I do have some articles here, and I will provide links to them. I think you'll find this interesting. The first article I have here is from My San Antonio. It's a an online newspaper. I don't think it's actually a print paper, although it could be. And it was originally printed in the Washington Post, so you can get a print copy of it if you like. That's by a fellow named Glenn Kessler. I wanted to make sure it wasn't Hessler. Kessler. Glenn Kessler with K. It was printed in the Washington Post just recently, Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. It's called a History Lesson, How the Democrats Pushed Obamacare Through the Senate. 25 days, and this is a quote from Chuck Schumer. 25 days consecutive session on a bill that was partisan in the sense that Republicans were angry with it, but we still had the courage of our convictions to have a debate on the floor. Yeah, right. The quote unquote. It's from Senator Chuck Schumer, a Democrat of New York, minority leader of the Senate, and his remarks on the Senate floor June 19th, 2017. To highlight the secrecy of the GOP health care deliberations, many Senate Democrats have pointed out that the debate over the Affordable Care Act was the second longest consecutive session in Senate history. Schumer even sought a parliamentary inquiry into the claim and was confirmed by the presiding officer, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. The Secretary of the Senate's office notes that H.R. 3590 was considered on each of 25 consecutive days of session, and the Senate Library estimates that approximately 169 hours in total consideration, she said. The longest session, February 12th, March 9th, 1917, concerned whether to arm merchant ships during World War I shortly before, the United States entered the conflict. That lasted 26 days. But this statistic obscures a reality. Yep. And for those of you who are too young to remember this, you might be surprised. The key work on creating the Senate version of the ACA was done in secret. Let's take a trip down memory lane. So it was even longer, and it was done in secret. It was done without the input of a lot of people. People were barred from it. In fact, the Republicans were barred from putting their input. The facts. To reconstruct this history, we reviewed news coverage of the period and transcripts, and also relied on a detailed account of the legislative maneuvering compiled by John Kanan, Research and Instructional Services Librarian at Drexel University's Thomas R. Klein School of Law. And I will add that those of you who have access to my page on Facebook, you can check back in 2009 and 10 and get a lot of information of what was going on with that. I did give Obama a year of relatively no criticism. I went pretty easy on him when I did. But there were things that he was doing that I didn't like, including the extreme secrecy with this. But you can find my notes and many, many articles that I had posted back in that time. There's quite a few things there. You can also find a lot of things on other issues, such as the too big to fail, and how the derivatives work, and that's how that problem was caused. Okay, anyway, I'll back up. To reconstruct this history, we reviewed news coverage of the period and transcripts, and also relied on a detailed account of the legislative maneuvering compiled by John Kanan, Research and Instructional Services Librarian at Drexel University's Thomas R. Klein School of Law. His report, published in the Law Library Journal, made the case that the ad hoc process that led to the ACA is, quote, an illustrative example of modern lawmaking, especially for major initiatives. The biggest difference between the Democratic effort to reshape healthcare in 2009 through 2010 and the Republican effort to undermine that achievement is that the Democrats made full use of the committee process. Republicans have skipped the days of hearings and lengthy markups that were a feature of crafting Obamacare. In the Senate, for instance, the drafting of a health care bill in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee took from June 17 to July 17, during which 500 amendments were made. In the Finance Committee, which drafted its version between September 22nd and October 2nd, there were 564 proposed amendments. Senator Olympia J. Snowe, Republican of Maine, even voted for the Senate Finance version. That effort and a companion effort in the House allowed for the broad outline of the Democratic plan to be apparent to the American public. But here's where it gets complicated and more opaque. Opaque meaning unclear. You cannot see through it, non-transparent. Working secretly in his office, much like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, Senate Majority Leader Harry M. Reid, Democrat of Nevada, merged the two committee bills and unveiled his own version of the health care on November 18th that was scored by the Congressional Budget Office. In a bit of legislative maneuvering, Reid offered his text as an amendment to a completely different House bill, the Service Members Home Ownership Tax Act of 2009. That's because this bill had been sitting in the Senate calendar of business, avoiding the need for Reid to obtain unanimous consent to bring it up. This bill was also already obsolete. The issue had been taken care of in another bill, and so it was an ideal vehicle to start debate on the Senate floor. Reid inserted the text into the shell of the old bill. On November 21st, a party line vote was allowed debate to begin on the health care bill. But Reid still did not have the support of all Democrats. As Kanan put it, quote, Democrats unhappy with the legislation's initial form were unwilling to block its path to consideration, but they threatened to filibuster if changes were not made. Reid had to have the support of each one to get a vote. While Republicans had not dug in their heels to fight the motion to proceed, hoping to tarnish vulnerable Democrats by forcing them to vote in a way that could be characterized as a substantive vote for the health care bill, they would not be so accommodating with the next cloture motion, and they were united in their opposition. So consideration of the consideration of the bill proceeded on two parallel tracks, starting when the Senate returned to the work on November 30th. The first track was public, with the illusion of debate and votes on amendments. The official record shows 506 amendments were offered. Kanan says this activity suggests a vigorous effort to alter the bill's final form on the Senate floor, but this number is deceptive. In actuality, only a tiny fraction of these amendments has any significance to the bill's legislative history. Only a handful of amendments covered by a unanimous consent agreement reached between the two that's UCA, unanimous consent agreement, reached between the two sides had any relevance, he concluded. Meanwhile, all those amendments not covered by UCAs, the unanimous consent agreement, were ordered to lie on the table as soon as they were introduced and had no parliamentary standing at all. That's because they just took it off the side. Oh, okay, it's not unanimous, and so they just put it away, put it over there. So no standing, it's just sitting. That's because the real work was going on behind closed doors. Back in Reid's office, where he had negotiated significant changes with a group of moderate Democrats. Eventually, Republicans and Democrats would no longer agree to even keep debating the matter on the floor, and so the public spectacle ended on December 16th. Imagine that. The Senate turned to other matters, including the passage of a Defense Department appropriation bill, while the private negotiations continued and the Senate remained in session. Right? They just kept working up the deal. Oh, come on in, kiss her ring, and we'll make a deal with you. Oh, you're the AMA. Oh, okay. Well, we'll limit the number of doctors. Gee, brilliant. But that's what happened. Anyway, they turned to other matters, including the passage of a defense appropriations bill while private negotiations continued and the Senate remained in session. During the private talks, Reid agreed to remove a public auction in the bill, as well as drop a plan to allow people between the ages of 55 and 65 to buy into Medicare. There was also a significant change in abortion coverage, which the Washington Post reported required hours of Schumer's and Reid's shuttling back and forth in Reid's office between anti-abortion Senator Ben Nelson, Democrat of Nebraska, and key supporters of abortion rights, Senators Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California, and Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, who never sat in the same room as Nelson. Some lawmakers, like the now retired Nelson, cut special deals. Nelson negotiated enhanced Medicaid reimbursement for his state. One state to the next, right? It's not a uniform plan by any means. Nor is it one that is transferable across state lines. There are strict jurisdictions, and each jurisdiction has its own deal. One of the big problems of making it an insurance bill. That's what they did. They're making it an insurance bill primarily. Once the deals were in hand, Reid on December 19th revealed a manager's amendment revising the proposed bill, which was also scored by the CBO. He filed 3 successive cloture motions to end the debate on the revised manager's amendment, on his original amendment, and on the original House bill. He also filed 3 other amendments that had the effect of filing the amendment free, cutting off opportunities for the Republicans to alter the text. See, what they did was they used the committee process to cut off any input from the opposition. So it's rather disingenuous to say that the Republicans were strictly non-cooperative. Now, they were dragging their feet on a lot of stuff, and to some extent, they were right to. But they were using the committees in order to basically, in a very unique way, obstruct the actual process that would normally come from the ordering and processes of putting a bill together. That's why it was such a stupid arrangement that Pelosi is famously noted for saying, let's pass this thing to find out what's in it. That's why. It was a mess. Nobody knew what was in it. How many pages was that? Thousands of pages. It's like the budget bill here in Illinois. Pretty much done the same way. Just as McConnell appeared to be determined to have a vote before the July 4th holiday so that lawmakers don't get nervous after confrontations with constituents, Reid pushed forward with a vote before Christmas. Republicans cried foul. I do not remember in my 15 years in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, any major piece of legislation such as this being debated and ultimately brought to a final vote within such a short period of time, declared Saxby Chambliss, at the time senator from Georgia. Over 3 successive days, the Senate took a series of votes, all of them split 60 to 39, to deal with Reid's various amendments. Washington was snowbound, and delaying tactics by Republicans meant votes took place as late as 1 a.m., forcing the 92-year-old wheelchair-reliant Senator Robert C. Byrd, Democrat of West Virginia, and also former Ku Klux Klan leader, what do you call him, Klaxon or some crap, who had missed 40% of the roll votes that year, to make a late-night journey through the snow and ice, trudged across tundra, One Bill Republican, Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma, even offered a prayer to stall the vote. What the American people ought to pray is that somebody can't make the vote tonight, he said. That's what they ought to pray. One housekeeping item, renaming the Service Members Home Ownership Tax Act of 2009 to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. See how that works. Shell game. One to the other. Final cat passage came on a 7 a.m. vote Christmas Eve morning. All told, the Friday night, December 18th, from the Friday night, December 18th, when Nelson and Boxer agreed to abortion language, to the Thursday morning / Christmas Eve of the final passage, there were about 5 days of consideration for the final bill in the Senate. The late David Broder, the fair-minded Washington Post columnist, was scathing in his criticism of the spectacle in a column headlined, "Health Reform Stench of Victory." I remember that. Reed, he wrote, quote, reduced the negotiations of his own level of transactional morality. Incapable of summoning his colleagues to statesmanship, he made the deals look as crass and parochial as many of them were, encasing a historic achievement in a wrapping of payoff and patronage, end quote. Indictment. That's an indictment. The bottom line. As we noted, Republicans have skipped the lengthy open process of hearings and markups of legislation that characterized the Democrats' march for the passage of the ACA. Instead, they moved directly to floor votes. Moreover, Democrats at first tried to enlist some Republican support, while Republicans have not reached out to Democrats. But recalling the second longest Senate session obscures the fact that the floor debate was mostly for show, an exercise designed to allow the closed-door negotiations that shaped the final bill to take place. Once the deal was struck, Reed pushed the final draft forward with as much speed as possible. That's what McConnell is doing now, pretty much, or was, having skipped the preliminaries. And it has a video of the Democrats arguing the process to pass Obamacare was more open, but the Republican health care bill, their final text was written behind closed doors, and it was. And let there be no mistake, actually the Republicans' doings were actually probably more open. But that's that article. The second one here is a Politico article. Good grief, I might even have posted this back in the day. And it is dated 10/27/2009. So that's October 27, 2009. This is before it was quite made. But like I say, it started in 2009, didn't end until 2010 around Christmas time. That tells you something. A lot of this behind the scenes stuff was going on. And the title of it is Closed Door Healthcare Reform Decried. It's by Chris Frates, or Frates, I think it's Frates. And this is from 2009. This was while the passions were high and hot, right? When Barack Obama was running for president, he vowed to lead the most open and transparent government in history. Candidate Obama even promised to negotiate health care reform live on television. That was his promise. Didn't happen. A lot of the deeds were done in his office. Okay, so maybe those of you who are younger, you get a picture. And those of you who were young then, they're getting a picture too, because this was not honest. It was a very deceitful thing that they did, and my brother calls it a poison pill for a number of reasons. I'd like to have him and another person come on the air when the two of them are meeting up over in Santa Cruz. I'd love to get them both to talk about this and other issues. We could just shoot the breeze for a couple hours, no problem, and It would be fun, actually. And but anyway, let me back up and start over. When Barack Obama was running for president, he vowed to lead the most open and transparent government in history. That was his promise. Candidate Obama even promised to negotiate health care reform live on television. He maintained that he was open about everything, although it was a clear lie. Well, then it came time to govern, and President Obama has negotiated major parts of the health care bill behind closed doors. Earlier this year, he announced the deals his administration had cut with drug companies and hospitals after brokering them out of public view. That's why we don't have cheaper prescription drugs, folks. He negotiated it and decided that he wanted to play up to Big Pharma. And he gave them a sweetheart deal. And now his top lieutenants are working in secret with leading Democrats to craft the health care bill that will be debated on the Senate floor. All of the insider wheeling and dealing has good government groups disappointed in an administration that promised more openness than it has delivered, and it never did deliver. Bill Allison of the Sunlight Foundation expressed the watchdog community's frustration when he said bluntly, quote, "This is a broken promise. We didn't get anywhere near the level of transparency that we were promised," end quote. It was a broken promise, and one that he insisted that he fulfilled, and his backers to this day, the sycophants, still insist that he actually went through it. And it is a lie. Stop lying, sycophants. Your man is gone. Your fake Messiah is done. And he's not coming back. Obama is learning what some political observers said during the campaign, that it's unreasonable to promise open negotiations on an issue as complicated as health reform. Oh, really? Oh, it was just a joke. You're so funny. I guess I just never believed it when it was promised. It seemed unrealistic, said Melanie Sloan, executive director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Nobody can have all their negotiations in public because then you never get to yes. But that doesn't mean Obama's off the hook, Sloan said. The president needs to explain why he's not living up to his campaign promise and should be at least briefing the public on what's happening in the meetings. And she's absolutely right. She was then and she is today. On the campaign trail last year, Obama promised an unprecedented level of transparency. Quote, "I'm going to have all the negotiations around a big table. We'll have doctors and nurses and hospital administrators, insurance companies, drug companies. They'll get a seat at the table, and they just won't be able to buy every chair. But what we'll do is we'll have the negotiations televised on C-SPAN." Yeah, C-SPAN. So people can see who is making arguments on behalf of their constituents and who are making arguments on behalf of drug companies or the insurance companies. Yeah, right. Did not happen. But that was a quote of Mr. Obama. In recent weeks, negotiations, particularly the Senate, have been anything but open. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Democrat of Nevada, and Senators Max Baucus of Democrat of Montana and Chris Dodd, Democrat of Connecticut, have been meeting with top White House aides to draft the bill Reid will bring to the Senate floor. The private talks have been held around Reid's conference tables, and participants have been tight-lipped about the proceedings. Yeah, they were. After the first meeting, reporters chased Rahm Emanuel, now mayor of Chicago, showing how stupid he can possibly be. Reporters chased Rahm Emanuel as he walked from Reid's office to visit Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but the White House Chief of Staff didn't disclose any details of what was disclosed. And he was the Chief of Staff at the time. In a press briefing last week, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs also said nothing about what's being decided behind closed doors. "I think the White House has been involved in meetings that normally happen in the evening as the two committees look to merge their legislation in a process that's being led by Senator Reid. That's all I've gotten from the folks involved in that," Gibbs said. Even a House Democratic aide, you're not hearing much of anything about the rigged negotiations. The lack of detail has open government groups wondering what's going on. When it's done behind closed doors, it usually gets torn apart, and the final product that's offered to the public is something that's been negotiated with lobbyists, special interests, and the lawmakers with something at stake, and it's not always in the public interest, said Craig Holman of the government watchdog group Public Citizen. Democrats bristle at the suggestion that special interests are influencing the bill, pointing to the public hearings, meetings, and health care program reform press coverage as proof that the process has been open. Lie! And the special interests dominated. The insurance lobbyists dominated. It was a bailout to the insurance companies. It was a sweetheart deal for the AMA to limit the number of doctors so they could keep higher rates. And it was also a sweetheart deal to the big pharma to keep from cutting the prices of medication. So there you go. There's your open process. There's your piece of crap ACA and how it was put together. I have one more. And I'm not a big fan of the single payer, because I don't think the insurance should be where the focus is in the first place. I think it's a waste of time. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. I don't want to destroy the insurance companies any more than I want to bail them out. It's too big to fail thing. And as far as it goes, the AMA is acting like a labor union. Really, that's the way they're acting. They want to limit the number of doctors to keep the amount of money high. They're out, so you know what you got is you have a handful of doctors where you should have tons of them, where the prices would go down. The competition would bring down the prices. I've talked to doctors about this. A lot of them are like, hey, you know, I would rather be in competition with other doctors and have to deal with, you know, getting less per customer than to have the insurance rates so high because of the way the insurance is configured. They have to retain a very expensive insurance themselves with a lot of deductibles themselves, just like we did. If we're going to buy insurance, we have to have a lot of deductibles. That makes it hardly worth even keeping. When they upped the rates on me, it wasn't even worth it anymore because it wasn't covering my drugs. I was paying so much to get my drugs. And I do need them. I have hypertension. So when the price doesn't justify it, and it doesn't justify the rare times I go into the doctor, why would I keep that insurance policy that is costing me more than it's worth? But they're going to penalize me for pulling out. Well, screw them. You can take that mandate and shove it right up Obama's. Yeah. It's where it belongs. He should walk around with that thing sticking out his rear end rest of his life. But even though I'm not in favor of single payer, ultimately it would destroy the insurance companies. And yeah, it'd go up too. I mean, what you're doing is you're making the government into an insurance company, which really isn't a terribly good idea. You still go back to the idea of lowering costs. If you lower costs, it really is a more effective way of actually fixing this problem. That's what they did in Turkey. Now, I'm not sure how they worked it out, but people in Turkey, and this is one of the few things Erdogan did right. I mean, people in Turkey, they were able to keep their insurance if they wanted it, just like Obama promised. It's like, oh well, you want to keep your insurance, you keep it. Well, yeah, you can keep your insurance there. But they did make sure that that everything was covered, and they minimized the amount of cost to you. You paid your taxes. Really, you were in. All I had to do is, because my company, well, since my Turkish isn't very good. I speak a little Turkish, and I understand more than I can speak, but my comprehension is something like insurance or something, which is I would need the document in front of me to understand it in the first place. My Turkish isn't that good. So with the company I worked for, they're very well, they were very good. They were good in most ways. I mean, there were some things, but they because I was one of the people that had been there for years and years and years and stuff, and I wasn't planning on leaving. And even when I left, I didn't really want to go. But at any rate, the thing is that they had set it all up, and they told me, okay, here's your number. If you need to go to the hospital, just give them this number. And it was on my cell phone. I mean. So, it's like, what was that number again? And my boss texted it back, and there it was on my phone, So if I had to go to the hospital, I just, I gave them my passport, and I showed them that number, and I was no problem. They had me right in the system. So I don't think that's a single payer, but the thing is that it was an efficient way of doing it. But how they did it was they plugged it into Social Security, and that is kind of the reason why we didn't do what he did, because frankly, the crooks in Washington spent the money in Social Security already. They picked it up and stole it. It's gone. They stole that frickin' money. So, as far as it goes, that was pretty good. And it covered a lot of things that I had to do. My drugs, I guess, were covered. But it wasn't really much of a discount. I didn't even bother with it, because as it was, Erdogan had worked with pharmaceutical companies around the world and negotiated a good price for his country. So pharmaceuticals were pretty cheap. I could get I thought they were going to be expensive, and when I came back home, it was like, holy cow, you're kidding. So I didn't buy them at home anymore, that's for sure. I bought them over there, even though they only gave me little boxes every month, but even now they only want to give me 1 month, no matter what I do. Have you ever wondered how much of this is meant to just be control over you? Have you wondered that? You should. You should think about it. Think about it long and hard. But at any rate, my drugs were cheap. My prescriptions, that is. When I had to order things from the pharmacy, they were generally pretty reasonable. Things like I had to get crutches for an injury to my ankles. 2013, I put on a bunch of weight after I quit smoking. That's why I'm a little tubbier now than in my earliest videos that you might want to look back at. Actually, they weren't too bad, really. And you see my apartment in Turkey, and you can hear my neighborhood and the muezzins and stuff. It was pretty cool. But at any rate, the thing was that when I hurt myself, I had to get like bandages, and they didn't put me in a cast, but they prescribed some stuff for the pain, and they gave me a cream to put on my ankle itself to help the soft tissues in my ankle to heal, and I had to use crutches for a couple weeks, and those were pretty reasonable. I think crutches cost me, I don't know, 25 lira or something, and that was at the time probably, I don't know, $14, $15, something like that. X-rays were exempted, so you had to pay for X-rays out of pocket, but they were cheap. I got X-rays for 35 lira, and that was like 2 or 3 of them, and that would have been in 2013. That would have been about, because the economy wasn't going south just yet. Well, yeah, it was. So it would have been $17 maybe, about 50, let's say, about 50 cents to the dollar for the lira. So that it was about half, so it was about $17 or so. So anyway, it wasn't bad. But the main thing was it was plugged into the Social Security. You paid your taxes. And, I paid taxes. They weren't very kind with taxes over there. It was a little chunk. But I worked hard, and I made money until idiot Erdogan kept trying to take control of the economy, and he just ended up ruining it. It was going down as fast as he could talk. Ridiculous. So, at any rate, I'm not necessarily a big fan of the single payer, but I do recognize that it is a thing that a lot of people believe will be fair to the people. Okay, so I'm not for it, and I know the arguments, but it's something I think that people ought to be able to debate, and debate fairly, and that it should be part of the dialogue. It should be. I mean, people should say, "Hey, Trump, you might want to think about this. Here's the positives, here's the negatives. So what do you got in mind?" He does something similar to what Erdogan did. I'll be all for it. As far as single payer goes, what are you talking about? Let's hear what your ideas are on this. And there's a few different ways to approach this. And so it's not like a monolithic idea either. So, it depends really on what you're talking about. How are you talking about it? Are you talking about putting it like through Social Security, like I just talked about here? I think it's a great idea. They need to account for the Social Security too. So that realistically probably won't happen, but it probably should. Now, you're talking about something else, then, we can discuss this. But at the time, 2009, they weren't very, let me read this. This is from an organization called Healthcare Now. It's still around, and it's still advocating single payer. And stated May 5th, 2009. And it's written by a woman named Donna Smith. And this was published in their own blog. Headline reads, "Doctors, single payer activists arrested, make history at Senate Finance Roundtable." This is something that a lot of people are wanting to bury, because it was a great embarrassment to the Democrats today. and I realized that Bernie Sanders was pushing for a single payer. And like I say, it's like, okay, what exactly are you talking about? That never really happened because Hillary Clinton never wanted to debate that issue with him. And he didn't get the chance to debate it with Trump, which I think would have been interesting, personally. Um, that said, it was also not talked about much before because even Obama was trying to bury this. He was giving dog whistles. Oh, we'll try to do that later. I don't think they were wanting to do that later. Hillary Clinton's enthusiasm for single payer was nil, still is nil. She'll dog whistle the leftists, but she won't fulfill them. She will not do that. She is against real change. How can you people buy into such a really stodgy, old line, unchanging establishmentarian globalist whose focus isn't on you, but on controlling the whole world for a handful of corporations that pay her a lot of money? How do you figure she is going to suddenly work for your interest? I don't get it. You have these pipe dreams of her being old Bubba Bill. Even Bubba Bill wasn't Bubba Bill. You don't remember it. You really don't. Or if you do, then you're actually profiting out of what they were doing with NAFTA and basically destroying the unions. That's what they were doing. Now, you might not like Trump. I don't care if you like Trump or not. But he's not out the union bust. I think that Ronner was misguided in those kinds of things. But I don't think that latching on to her is a solution. It's not. And if it is a solution, then surely you're not thinking about who the real middle class is. You're thinking that the middle class is a bunch of low-level flunkies working for the government or a big corporation. No. That's not the middle class. It's working people. It's small shop owners. It's people who do the daily business in every town. It's where all those stores are shut down or knocked down and making what's standing look like the broken teeth of somebody who'd been in a fist fight. And you wonder why your cities look the way they do. Oh, I just came from the East Coast, over the West Coast. They're starting to sink in over there too, And really, they never got over Obama either. They're just a little more enamored with his illusions. And even then, Santa Cruz and San Jose and that area is a little bit more conservative than the rest of the coastline. Just a bit. Not a whole lot, but a bit. I did see the sanctuary city stuff, and most people seem to be, fairly liberal. But, I don't mind that. They weren't gaga. They weren't goofballs rolling their eyes back in the back of their head and putting on their pussy hats. Didn't have that. Hello. Think about it. California is about ready to hit some change too. The extreme has been run over and run past, and people are starting to open their eyes about what really happened. They're actually realizing we actually voted for her. Not to mention, they're starting to look at some of the shenanigans from the illegals. And everybody wants to conflate them into being being all the immigrants being illegal. They're not illegal. Not only that, I was living in another country, and I had people come back saying, "Well, you know how it feels to be an illegal alien." It's like, no, I don't. Because even when I ended up being illegal when my visa ran out, I got in contact with the government. That's what you do. If you're in a country illegally, you want to make sure that you get out of it legally. None of this nonsense about being an illegal and staying in a country. Give me a bloody break. I'll have to talk about that more often. But at any rate, I've been digressing. I need to get back over to healthcare. And this is about single payer. And what happened to single payer activists early on. And it didn't end there. It was really kind of pathetic. And everybody was saying, well, he'll do it later. He's going to pass this and he's going to improve on it later on. Like, that's not how you do things like this. When has a bill ever been done, ever been written so that you can adjust it in the future? That's idiotic. And I said that back then. And if you go back and look at my old posts, you probably see some of the people arguing that. And I told them that it was a stupid thing to think on. It was a stupid thing to think it was going to be promised, and it was probably never going to happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why that Bernie Sanders did so well by latching on to it, is because there is the potential of a promise in here that could possibly be good, depending on how you do it. Can it be done? Yeah, maybe. Talk about it. Talk about it. Show me. Meanwhile, I'll insist, first of all, even before you even talk about that, lower the costs. We shouldn't have the costs that we have. Lower the costs. Lower the costs. Things will be better. Don't make it all about insurance. That said, I do respect a lot of what people have to say about single payer. So, doctors, single payer activists arrested, make history at Senate Finance Roundtable by Donna Smith. It has finally happened right here in the United States. Citizens who believe healthcare is a human right have been arrested and are being processed like criminals throughout the Southeast District of Columbia Police Station. Their crime? Asking for single-payer health care reform, publicly funded, privately delivered health care, to be discussed during the congressional hearings on reform. Doctors and other single-payer activists were handcuffed and went to jail today, speaking up for single-payer to be at the table in the Senate Finance Committee's roundtable discussion on health care access and coverage. In stark contrast, Karen Ignani, head of the industry lobby group American Health Insurance Plans, AHIP, right, was escorted into the room like royalty by staff members of the Senate committee. Clearly, the position of the United States Senate is not with the majority of Americans who support a national public insurance system. It made me physically ill to see Maryland pediatrician Margaret Flowers cuffed like a criminal and pushed out the door as the senators waited to begin their staged roundtable discussion. It made me want to scream. It made me proud of them for being bold, but ashamed that not one senator spoke up for their own citizen protesters and asked that they at least be allowed to speak. But the insistence that the citizens rising in protest be arrested continued from the chair with each incident. Simply by asking to have single payer to be included and fully vetted is a crime. Profiting as the for-profit health insurance companies do at the expense of 22,000 American lives every year, however, gives you a run of the table in this health care reform discussion. Just ask the senators who are drafting what this nation's health system will look like, and watch their behavior today if you want evidence of how your voice will be heard in the process. Now that change comes from within, what did they do anyway? Pretty similar behavior, only they didn't escort any of these people out. The protesters were stoic and respectful, but direct. One by one they stood. One by one they asked why single-payer reform was not at the table. Of 15 witnesses, Senator Max Baucus and his Finance Committee gathered to map out what sort of coverage Americans might expect in the Senate reform bill now being crafted. Senator Baucus eventually spoke and indicated that he was respectful of those who believe in single-payer, as he acknowledged many of his constituents in Montana do. But he made no attempt to explain why no single-payer voice has been included in any Senate discussion to date. He urged any others in the audience who might have any designs on speaking up like the protesters did not to do so. And then he moved on to his roundtable discussion. When they pulled away a few Republicans for revoking this atrocity, they're pretty cruel about it, and they're talking like, oh yeah, it's going to come back on you. No, it won't. It's going to go back on you people. It's going back on you people that made it in the first place, and the ones that backed it. It needs to go. It needs to go. It's hurting more than it's helping. Now, I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's a fact. It needs to go. Now, there are some aspects of it, sure, keep them. Keep the kids on longer. Let some kind of subsidy for the time being cover poor folks. That's fine. Ones that are still on it. Get rid of that mandate. Get rid of it now. I'm not paying that thing. I'm not. I refuse to pay it. And I think a lot of other people will too. There's been a lot of riding roughshod over people that happened in those 8 years that Obama was ruling the country. And you're not really seeing that right now. It's time for you snowflakes to wake up. What right have you really lost? I don't think you've lost anything. We can talk about maybe some of the transsexuals. That wasn't even done. That wasn't a done deal. And those that are already in, we can argue about maybe finding some accommodation for them. But there's no way that we should have the military be an experimental social experiment. We really don't need that. I'll even do a little bit on that too in the near future. I got some things lined up. But this healthcare thing has just been terrible. And what they did to the single-payer people was shameful. And I'll continue. The press seated comfortably at the press table looked amused and then puzzled by the procession of protests in the chamber. The C-SPAN cameras fixed on both the committee's table and at the front of the room and the witness table directly across from them could have easily picked up the protests, but the network chose to keep their camera fixed only on Chairman Baucus. C-SPAN even went along with their propaganda. Though the protesters' words could be heard in the audience. Strange, isn't it? You could hear them, but you couldn't see them. Only 2 reporters of the 20 or so assembled were curious enough or industrious enough to rise and exit the room to see if the arrests being carried out in the hallway. While neither the Finance Committee or the press allowed their proceedings to be disrupted for very long, the air in the room and the atmosphere had changed. The giddy and gleeful assembly of industry lobbyists who had been chattering in rapt anticipation of the coming of their carefully chosen witnesses could not deny that some brave and patriotic fellow citizens had just been hauled out for arrest for nothing more than demanding a point of view held by a majority of patients, nurses, physicians, and other healthcare providers. Then that is something that needs to be proven. Be included in the national discussion. It is their opinion, though. This group's opinion. While this Congress may pass something very different than single-payer reform, it will not do so without hearing the cries of the people left so openly exposed to personal health and financial ruin by the corrupt system that celebrates only profit. The citizens who stood for the thousands and thousands of dead today will not let this democracy give itself completely over to big money interests in healthcare, not without a fight, not on their lives or yours or mine. Well, yeah, they did, and they got a whole bunch of air and nothing else. So that's where it stands even today. It wasn't the only time. I mean, there were other times. There's one 2010, 2012, where they were harassed. The Obama government was not kind to single-payer advocates. So there's some other stuff on there, but I will provide links and let you examine those for yourselves. The thing is that the healthcare issue is not over. I am hoping that it will address costs first and insurance later on. Maybe even remove insurance from it being even an issue. I don't see any purpose in continuing to subsidize the insurance industry at all. And I like the idea that President Trump has mentioned of maybe not subsidizing the congressional people and their staffs for their health care while this goes on. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of us are all for that. Take it away from him, President Trump, and see how long they go without caving in and actually coming up with something good, something that you, Rand Paul, and people of good sense can approve of. So until next time.